Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new show today. We are talking about the latest in coronavirus news. We'll take a look at how it will take a political lens in some of the states that decided the 2016 election. How those governments are handling it could be interesting to keep an eye on. Also, 150,000 Americans seem to have just got sacrificed for the stock market. Jared Kushner reportedly advised less COVID-19 testing to calm Wall Street. So, very disturbing. We'll take a look at how that calculation kind of happened. But also, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, they're building new policy-focused task forces. Is this the step for party unity that the Democrats so desperately need? I will evaluate. New spying powers been approved by the Senate without these crucial privacy protections that so many wanted, and Jeff Bezos could become a trillionaire in a few years. Yes, a trillionaire. It's pretty crazy stuff. And joining us now, we have to talk about it all, the only good CEO, the CEO of Stump on Twitter, Krishna Ramaswamy. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Hey guys.
All right, yeah, so we're going to get right into it today, and we're going to talk about the coronavirus. And you haven't, obviously, been on the show. We haven't talked to you before, so I just want to kind of start really at the basic point. Like, what is your evaluation of the handling of the coronavirus? Like, do you kind of feel more in the way of, like, government overreach, or are you much more of a, like, we need as much time as possible before we open up? Like, where do you fall on that kind of spectrum?
Yeah, so I fall somewhere in between. So I think there are a couple of good things that have been done, good preventable measures that we've taken to make sure that this doesn't become as big of an issue as it could have been without social distancing restrictions in the past. But definitely, I don't think we should start opening up really soon, because according to a bunch of different estimates, we have quite a while before we can be safe and know that social distancing measures should be kind of let go. But on the other hand, we definitely are suffering a lot with our economy. I know the percent of Americans that are unemployed now is approaching 10%, I believe. So that's definitely something that's not good. I was reading an article the other day that was talking about ways that we can kind of let go of certain social distancing restrictions going forward. And what they suggested was this model where for college students who are probably significantly less at risk than others for the coronavirus, it was suggested that they work or go to college or go to classrooms on kind of a schedule where they're there for 10 days. And it's like an on and off schedule. So you retest every week and you make sure that there's like this period between once you contract coronavirus and once you're able to spread it to other people, and that's a 4-day period. So using a certain mathematical model, you can figure out like the most optimized way for people to work on and off from at home or in college or school. So yeah, we should do something going forward to make sure that we can help the economy. But I think as of right now, we should probably hold on to our social distancing measures.
Yeah, definitely. I do kind of agree with what you're saying there. It's definitely, I think, probably where the majority of Americans fall into. But we have seen some pretty strong departures. For example, in Wisconsin, residents woke up to a state of confusion on Thursday after the conservative majority on the state Supreme Court sided with the Republican majority in the legislature on Wednesday night, overturning a statewide stay-at-home order issued by the governor, Tony Evers, who happens to be a Democrat. And in Michigan, this is really kind of a crazy situation. Hundreds of protesters, many of them armed, turned out at the state capitol in a drenching rainstorm after the state had closed the capitol and canceled the legislative session after threats directed at the governor, Gretchen Whitmer. Amber McCann, who's a spokesperson for the Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirley, said that while some senators were concerned for their safety, that was not the main reason for canceling the session, obviously because people, social distancing fears and not really getting remote planning up. And I think the funny thing is I just read before we started the show that the head judge in the Supreme Court compared the Wisconsin Supreme Court, in her opinion, like cited the Korematsu versus the United States case and compare Japanese internment to increasing social distancing restrictions, which is like just absolutely bananas. But and it kind of shows you, like, what do you make of these protesters, these kind of like conservative protesters, like the people who've been in Michigan? Like, do you think they are kind of the struggling people, like trying to get by, or are they a little bit different?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the frustration that a lot of people have, especially with the amount of job loss we've been seeing, and it's definitely very difficult, and it's taken a toll on the American people. But at the same time, it's not productive in any way, shape, or form. I don't think it's really going to get anything done, and the bottom line is it's not safe to be having these protests. And if you actually look at the science, you'll realize that getting rid of these social distancing measures won't do any good right now. We're basically right today, the total amount of cases per day that we're having in New York is around what it was like when we actually opened. I mean, when we actually started social distancing and when we started shutting down everything. And so it's not nearly finished right now. And that's in New York. And in New York, the curve is ahead of a lot of other states that are way behind. So we definitely have to wait a little while.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing that we need to focus on. And the fact that a lot of other states, well, some have handled it well. Like, some have been very good in social distancing. Some states have flattened the curve. The situation really is different in every state. And that's kind of complicating reopening plans because we all have these different governments. And that obviously kind of plays a big role in the election. And how are different states going to handle the election, and what response generally? So the response to the coronavirus is kind of becoming a confused and agitated blend of health guidance, protest, and partisan politics, leaving residents to fend for themselves. This is a quote in the New York Times from a hair salon owner in Madison, Wisconsin. "My anxiety for this pandemic is not having a unified plan, that we're on the same page, listening to the science and the same rules." This is from Jamie O'Brien. And that kind of, where do you see this kind of heading? Because there's so many different states. Do you worry about, like, what, for example, is going to happen with the election? Like, will it get in the way of turnout? Will it, get in the way of the election's legitimacy if we have, for example, states like, I don't know, New York that will have all mail-in ballots, or maybe a state like Georgia that's very well open that will have people come in and vote in person? Like, do you see that as a problem maybe for down the road?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely going to affect voter turnout. And another thing that it could potentially create is basically you're going to have a higher voter turnout for certain economic groups and a lower voter turnout for other groups, in my opinion, because I think a lot of people, let's say, are people who are more at risk, for example, in states where you don't. So this is for age group, not for economic status. But let's say older people might have a lower voter turnout because in certain states, if you have to actually go and show up in person, they're obviously not going to want to go out because they're more at risk. So things like that will affect it for sure. And then also, if it turns into something that's online, of course, people who have access to like the internet or stuff like that, it's going to be more difficult for some people to get out and be heard. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that's going to play out. Do you have any thoughts on that issue? Like, what do you think we should be doing?
I mean, that's it's a very interesting. I mean, I don't know. I think it would be really great. I don't know where this like kind of stands legally, or like what authority the federal government has. But if I were the president, I would kind of like issue an executive order to say, like, just so we're all on the same page, here's how voting's going to go. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you could do it now because things may actually get better where it is safer for some people. But I think like we should be kind of all for one or one for all. Just like it's a scientific thing, right? Like you got to keep the same conditions for everyone, kind of have the same standard, so that one state, for example, wouldn't be favored otherwise, because that kind of questions the legitimacy.
Yeah.
Like you're running out of process. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing is like you, at the same time you have like, it's not going to make a difference. Like the popular vote isn't going to make a difference. So at least like, let's say you have the New York, for example, and you think a lot of people won't show up. So, of course, the voter turnout, we want it to be high because we want to have an accurate representation of what the American people think. But at the same time, the actual numbers might not be affected that much because at the end of the day, you're taking the electoral college votes for each state. So as long as it's not something that's causing more Republicans to go out or more Democrats to go out because of the coronavirus, we might actually have a relatively accurate representation.
Yeah, I definitely think that is an issue to watch. And speaking of kind of the Democratic Republican back and forth, we see a lot of that playing out now. What the Democrats are trying to do is now try and push a bill that, at least ostensibly, I would say, is focused on more people relief. Like the first one was kind of more for the companies. The second one was also for quote unquote smaller businesses. And now we have a $3 trillion Democratic relief bill on the eve of the House vote. The White House is threatening to veto it. We talked about this recently. There was a lot of things in there for lobbyists. It definitely wasn't far from a perfect bill the Democrats have put out there. But still, it is the Democrats or the Republicans. Sorry, they're not objecting on those grounds. Obviously, we heard the new excuse from Mitch McConnell is now, after we've given trillions to companies and big companies at that, the deficit for him is starting to become a problem once it comes time to focus on the people. What do you make of this response? And like, are you worried about the deficit? Like, what do you think about this Democratic bill, if you've heard anything about that?
Yeah, so I haven't heard too much about it, but definitely I understand that the economy is becoming a huge issue right now. And I think a lot of, for example, Trump basically wants to run on the economy as his primary focus, because in the past he's done a lot of talking about how the economy has done very well under his presidency, and that's usually one of his biggest talking points going forward. So I definitely think Republicans will have will have a bias where they kind of want to reopen the economy quicker because they want to be able to show that the economy is going to be recovered completely under Trump. And that's why he's also, in my opinion, kind of playing down some of these effects and saying that things will go away and saying that the economy is going to recover better than ever. So I understand why Mitch McConnell says what he says, but I personally disagree and think it's, not it.
Yeah. Because I do get what you're saying there. Like he has been so much of his success has been people who maybe not focusing on politics that much. They look at the economy, they look at like the stock market, and they say, "Oh, well, Trump's doing a good job handling all that stuff." I mean, he may talk inappropriately, but at least he's got the economy, right? And he may be best positioned to bring us back to those times. And I think really the election kind of comes down to whether people blame like China for the coronavirus or whether people blame Trump for the coronavirus, because Trump's probably going to try and pin it as much as he can on China and the China virus, the Wu flu, whatever they used to be calling it. But I think it's going to be hard for them to make that case, even if the stock market is going up, which it is right now, even as millions and millions of people continue to suffer and lose their jobs, even if that is going up, if the people don't get some money back in their pocket, then it's very hard. It's going to be very hard for him, no matter how high the Dow Jones is, to kind of make that case.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I also think that at the end of the day, like, we see that these politicians on both sides are kind of trying to blame the coronavirus situation on either Trump or on China or something else. But at the end of the day, I think regardless of who the president was, it was bound to affect us as much as it did. And you see that across all countries, regardless of whether the countries are more progressive or more conservative. So I definitely think he could have handled the situation better. I know he disbanded kind of a team that was supposed to handle pandemics in the past, which definitely wasn't a good move. But I think in certain situations, he's done good things, such as I remember as soon as the coronavirus started hitting Europe, we had that kind of ban on Chinese people into the United States. And I know a lot of newspapers and a lot of media outlets were saying that that was like either bigoted